Hey guys, how's it going? So in today's video, we're going to take a look at risk premiums and bubble factors. So in the last video, I mentioned bubble factors and said, hey, drop a comment down below if you want a video on risk premiums and bubble factors. And so here we are. Here's the video. Let's get into it. So here is a slide then I've taken from a webinar I did within my academy, all around pre-flop ICM. We're going to talk risk premiums and bubble factors. Here is an example of a chart you can get in Holdem Resources Calculator, which looks at the bubble factors for each position versus all the other positions. So for example, you can see the button there, it says button 7.8, has a bubble factor of 2.49 against under the gun, and in fact has a bubble factor of the same all the way through to the small blind, and then against the big blind, it's slightly different. And the reason for this, of course, is that the big blind is a slightly shallower stack. So the two players with the highest bubble factor here are the button and the big blind. So the way then that we calculate bubble factor is we look at the change in our tournament equity if we lose, divided by the change in our tournament equity if we win. And then we can use the bubble factor to work out risk premium. So you can see here, extra equity required, aka risk premium, equals, and then there is a formula. So I'm going to just go through this really quickly with you now. So let's take the button's bubble factor against under the gun. All right, so we are going to first do 1 divided by 2.49. That's this part of the equation, the 1 divided by the bubble factor. Then we're going to add 1 to that number, and then we're going to do 1 over that number, as you can see up here. So we get 71.3467%. So what you could say is, okay, this is the amount of equity we need in order to call in this spot. Let's just say, under the gun jams and the button has a decision here. So you're going to need 71% equity against that calling range. Now you can see the final part of the formula though is minus 50%. So the reason why it says minus 50% here is because when under the gun shoves, the button is going to be getting a price that's better than 50%. If you take blinds and antes out, equity required is going to be 50%. But we know that because there are blinds and antes in there, the number is actually going to be less than 50%. So let's say, for example, that the button needs 43% equity to break even for chips. Then what we do is we add on this 21.3% number, and that's going to come to 44.3. Do another quick example. Let's take EP versus under the gun. So 1 divided by 1.62, add 1, and then 1 over x, 61.83, take away half, and we get 11.8%. So as you can see then in this little chart here, we've got the chip equity, so the equity required to call for chips or to make a break-even call for chips. And then we have this extra equity required, and that's the risk premium. So you can see the higher the bubble factor, the higher the risk premium. So charts, colors, formulas, and all of that is great, but how do you actually use it in game? Well, what I've done is put together 4 toy games, and we're looking at the final 3 players in an MTT. And one player's got 60 bigs, one player has 20 bigs, and one player has 5 bigs. I'm going to show you what effect it has on the strategy for each of those players, depending on where they're sitting at the table. Let's get into it. Okay, so I've created these 4 toy games within HRC. They are listed at the top here. In fact, what I'm going to do is pull this over so you can actually see what the stack sizes are for the different players. Let's see if we can do this. So I guess like quite a lot of the screen now is going to be taken up by this, but I think it's useful to be able to see the different stack sizes. So this first one, button's got 5 bigs, small blind's got 60, big blind's got 20. I could take this over further, but it's going to cut down on this bit of the screen. Then we've got button 5 bigs, small blind 20, big blind 60. So we're going to compare those two first. Then we're going to take a look at button 60 bigs, small blind 20 bigs, big blind 5 bigs. And then finally, button 20 bigs, small blind 5 bigs, big blind 60 bigs. First thing we're going to look at then is bubble factors. And as you can see, the player with the 20 big blinds is going to have the highest bubble factor against the player who covers him, which is the small blind. So as you can see, the bubble factor's not particularly high for the small blind and the big blind against the button. But as you can see, 2.71 for the player with 20 bigs against the player with 60 bigs. So if I just bring in the trusty calculator again, we're going to do 1 divided by 2.71 plus 1 over that number, 73%, so minus 0.5. So we're going to need an extra 23% to call if jammed on. So quick recap then on the spot. Button has 5 bigs, small blind 60, big blind 20. So I'm sure you can imagine what the small blind is going to get to do here, but let's have a look. And as you can see, folding 0%. So in these situations where you have a big chip lead and you cover the player in the big blind and there's a short stack as well, and you know that the big blind's risk premium or bubble factor against you is really, really high, then you should be looking to VPIP 100% of hands. So you can raise some really bad hands down here, like 8-3 off, 9 deuce off, 8-2 suited, and then have some raise calls as well towards the top. And then the rest of the range, you're actually just going to go ahead and jam, as you can see, the hands in this sort of minty green color. So bearing in mind that the big blind's risk premium is really high, we worked it out to be around 23%, even though we're shoving 77% of hands from the small blind, you can see the big blind only gets to call with 10s plus, and even 9s is not really loving it. It's worth 8 cents in this example. So several takeaways straight away then. Small blind, just play really, really aggressively. Don't limp, don't fold. I think that'd be the #1 mistake to make in this spot, would be to fold in the small blind shoes. And then when you're in the big blind, you face a jam, you got to call really, really tight. It's a disaster at this stage to bust before the player with 5 big blinds. So now we're going to compare this to what happens when the small blind has 20 bigs. The button still has 5 bigs, but now the big stack, the 60 big blind stack, is in the big blind. So as you can see, the range is really, really tight in this spot. You know, we can't limp too often because the big blind can just raise or jam on us and we just can't call. And then if we raise, we're going to get jammed on and then we can't call. And so the other option is to jam, and you can see the hands in green are the hands that we want to jam in this spot. So, you know, huge takeaways here is going to play really, really tight in the small blind shoes when we're the middle stack and the short stack has already folded, and the big stack is the one that we are shoving into or raising into or limping into. Just in case you were wondering, the bubble factor is exactly the same here, 2.71. All right, so when we do limp, let's have a look at the big blind strategy. So once again, big blind is going to jam some hands, going to check back a lot of the hands in purple, and then it's going to have this polarized range for raising the top and being able to call off, and then raising the bottom hands and folding these when jammed on. So if the big blind does raise, then the small blind's strategy is going to look something like this. Quite a lot of calling, to be honest. You know, I think a lot of players would limp jam 7s through 9s in this spot. But you can see that actually wants to just limp call. And then there is some raising. We have some small raising here I allowed in there, but we're also going to do some jamming with some ace-x. So if we do jam, if we limp jam in this spot, then the big blind strategy is all of those hands that we imagined, right? That raise for value. So 8s plus, ace queen off, ace 10 suited plus. The first example then, we saw the small blind can just play really aggressively and put a ton of pressure on the player with the highest bubble factor and highest risk premium. In the second example, we can really see the effect of the bubble factor and the risk premium, because now it's not just the hands that the small blind can call, but now it's what hands the small blind can actually play, and you can see the range or strategy is really, really tight. Okay, so the next example then is button has 60 bigs, small blind has 20 bigs, and the big blind now has 5 bigs. And as you might expect, the button gets to open super wide and also gets to jam quite a lot of hands in this spot. So once again, if the button jams, the small blind with 20 bigs has got to call really, really tight. Let's just have a look at that. So this is the jamming range in sort of this pinky salmony color. And then the small blind this time can only call with jacks plus. If the button does raise the hands in purple, as you can see here, then the small blind is not going to have many 3-bets at all. Does get to flat some hands, but again, it's a really, really tight range. Given how wide the opening range is from the button, this range is really, really tight. And again, you can see the effect of that really high risk premium. And then we're going to jam some hands too. Jacks plus, ace king, ace jack suited, and some suited wheel aces as well. So the final example then, we're going to have button on 20 bigs, the small blind on 5 bigs, and the big blind on 60 bigs. And once again, just like when the small blind had 20 bigs and the big blind had 60 bigs, we just don't get to open too many hands. We don't get to play many hands. So you can see, I mean, for a button range, this is ridiculously tight. So min raising 2.3%, actually wants to just go ahead and jam a lot of hands here. Doesn't want to raise fold a lot because when we raise and we get jammed on, we're going to end up only being able to call a few hands. So wants to actually just take away the opportunity for the big blind to jam on us. So we're just going to go for a jam ourselves. When we do jam, the big blind calls pretty tight here, 8s plus ace jack, which is pretty nice. Small blind actually calls pretty tight here as well. I mean, we are shoving pretty tight in the first place. We do actually shove hands like pocket kings, pocket queens, jacks in this situation. So I think that might be quite unusual in this spot. Maybe some of you are looking at that and thinking, don't we want to induce with kings? So I think it's quite interesting to see just how strong we get to jam for 20 bigs in this spot. So when we do min raise, then the big blind gets to defend really wide. But pretty interestingly, because our range is so tight, 2.3% of hands, we're going to have some really strong hands like pocket aces, and then we're going to have a few bluffs as well. The big blind actually plays quite a lot of calls with some really strong hands, so kings, queens, etc. And then jams the ace-x hands, because if you think about it, when the big blind does jam, well, we're calling off with ace-x hands ourselves, pocket aces, and a bit of the ace-jack suited that we opened with. So going back to this jamming range, so it makes sense really to have these ace-x hands as jams, blocking a lot of the button's calling range. So once again, some really big takeaways here. Mainly got to open really tight on the button, raising into the big stack E in the big blind. The big blind here can just put an enormous amount of pressure on you. So you got to open tight in the first place, but also jam a lot of strong hands, not just induce with kings or queens, as you might expect. So a pretty nice exercise, I think. Running 4 toy games like this can really just highlight the importance of understanding ICM, understanding risk premium and bubble factors, start to give you a better idea of what to do in these different situations. Obviously, this is just 3-handed. We could have done it 4-handed, but then it gets even more complicated, adding an extra player in there. So I think starting with 3-handed, giving the shortest player a really short stack, the medium player a stack that if they double up, they're still not going to be in first place, I think was really important. That's something maybe I didn't mention at the start of the video. And then having the big stack big enough so that if they do lose to the 20 big blind stack, they're still in first place. If you haven't done so already, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification icon as well. And I'll be back soon with a brand new video. But until then, take care and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.